Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tevach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer Tanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is dedicated by Rabbi Raskin. We finished chapter 9, Perek Tes of Tanya, and we will begin now Perek Yud. Let's sum up. What have we learned? So in the structure of Tanya, we'll begin with the structure. The first chapter, the Alter Rebbe lays out the Gemara, Seif Perek Gimel the Nida, about Mashbiya Neisei Tihi Tzaddik V'al Tihi Rosha. That every person given an oath is empowered to be righteous and not be wicked. And the Alter Rebbe asked a series of questions, which led the Alter Rebbe next into a discussion of the fact that every human being, every Jew, has two souls, the divine soul and the animal soul. It begins with the animal soul. At the end of chapter 1, he moves on to the divine soul. And that goes for chapters 2, 3, 4, and 5. It talks about the nature of the divine soul, its faculties, its garments, its expressions, thought, speech, and action. Then in chapters 6, 7, and 8, it goes back to the animal soul. So now we have the so-called the dissecting of the anatomy of the divine soul, the animal soul, also its faculties and its garments. And in chapter 9, the confrontation, the battle, where they meet. Yaakov and Esav, Lum Yamotz. They meet and they struggle. Each one wanting something that is the diametric opposite of the other. The divine soul seeking godliness, purpose, transcendence. The animal soul seeking self-gratification, pleasure, serving its own needs. And both want to control the Iktanu Ze'aguf, the small city, like two kings fighting over the control of a city. The city is the Iktana, the person, the body, and the citizens in the city are the faculties and the garments. And they're fighting over that. And he elaborates how the divine soul wants to completely transform the city to be the divine soul's allies. Not just neutralize, but transform. That even the ones that were initially adversaries should also become allies. And the animal soul wants the opposite. As we learned last week at the conclusion of chapter 9, he adds that the animal soul really, its inner will is that we shouldn't listen to it, but it does its job faithfully. And what is his job? His job is to try to seduce and convince us to not follow what God wants. So you have the Nefesh Abamis in its inner intention is really, but you shouldn't listen, but its outer expression, it has to do the job faithfully. It can't do it in any compromised way. And hence, when the animal soul controls the person, unfortunately, like he said, it dresses up in the garments of thought, speech, and action that's focused on selfish needs, on pleasure, on the material existence of our lives. And with that, we have now set the stage, the battle. The next chapters 10, and then chapter 11, and then chapter 12 and on, are going to discuss, okay, so where do we stand? Now that in chapter 9 we laid out the pieces, you can say the players, the chess play pieces. In this case, the animal soul, the divine soul, pitted against each other. And we've learned about what each one wants and the extent of how much you can dominate and control to the point of transformation. So where do we stand? How do you measure? What's the barometer? So he's going to now go back to terms used in the beginning of Tanya. The Tzaddik is one level. The Rosha is the second level. And the Beinoni is the third level. 3 ways of measuring the battle. How do you know where you stand? Who's winning the battle? So chapter Perek Yud, chapter 10 is going to talk about the Tzaddik. Chapter Yud Aleph, 11, is going to talk about the Rosha. And chapter 12 is going to talk about the Beinoni, And from there on, the main focus is the Beinani. Sefer Shal Beinim is Tanya. As we shall discuss what that means. But briefly, the Tzaddik, obviously, you can imagine, measures and gives us a sense that who's winning? The divine soul is winning. But we're going to learn there's two levels, how much the divine soul dominates. We learned already in chapter 9 that the divine soul can control, but not necessarily fully transform. So we're going to learn that there's two levels. A Tzaddik Gomor, a Tzaddik She'ena Gomor. The order in Tanya is Tzaddik She'ena Gomor, a Tzaddik Verale, and a Tzaddik V'tevle, a Tzaddik Gomor. And there's two levels of how much you transform even the left side of the heart, the impulsive, the animal soul's emotions that is resting through and that manifests in the emotions, how much is that transformed? In Perek Yud Aleph, the Rasha is the other way around. What dominates there more is the animal soul. But there's two. There's a Rasha V'tevle, a Rasha V'rale. Same idea. But there's the other way around. The animal soul, is the animal soul completely in control or partially? And the Beinani, and this is the key, the Beinani we're going to learn is not just the intermediate half mitzvahs, half Avedis, as the Alter Rebbe already explained in chapter 1 why you can't say that. The Beinani is that in his faculties he has the battle going on, the raging battle of chapter 9. But in actuality, in the three garments of thought, speech, and action, he has control. So he has functional control over the city, even though within there's brewing, within there's the festering, this battle that goes on, and that's the Beinani. But let's not jump ahead of ourselves. I just stated it for the context and record. Let's go now to the Tzaddik. So let's learn inside Perek Yud Tanya. It's interesting also, Perek Yud, chapter 10, number 10, is the full number, Mispar HaShalom. By a Tzaddik, he's a complete person. Yud Aleph, Perek Yud Aleph, which is the Perek of the Rasha, Yud Aleph, so this explains, Yud Aleph Samamani Hakteris, already there's a Makif. Because in Kedusha, everything is 10. In Klippa, there's the 11th hovering shadow, so to speak. That's chapter 11. Just as a remez. So now let us learn inside, and we're going to now discuss the actual level of somebody who conquers his animal soul. One more point before we read inside. Why do we need to know this? If it's Sefer Shal Beinanim, and the most we can reach, as we'll learn later in the later chapters, is being a Beinani, is self-control over your garments, that you should not think, speak, or act in accordance with the animal soul's wishes, but only the divine soul, but inside. There's a battle. So why do we need to know chapter Yud about a Tzaddik? So first of all, for the complete picture, we're talking here, Chassidus, need to know all the levels. It's just like if you're running a marathon. You may not be able to reach to the end. You still want to know there's a destination. And a tzaddik is the epitome, personification of perfection in the sense of winning the battle. In the tzaddik itself, two levels. It's number one. Number two, when you have that standard, so even when it comes to lower levels of Aveda, it also helps inspire. It helps elevate. Because you're saying, I'm looking for that. I may not be there yet. Like we say, Moshe Yagiye Maisi Lemaisi De Avesai. By knowing what Avram, Yisrael, and Yaakov are like, doesn't mean you become exactly like them, but you aspire. And finally, in V'sicha Vayetze Tov Shenun, the Rebbe says that since Tanya is Karev Elecha Dover Me'ed, every chapter, so also chapter Yud, that in us B'dakus, everyone has the Tzaddik Bein Rasha within him. Meaning there are times when we are in that state that we're going to learn about. And we'll discuss that as we go along, that we have, at times we can be in that state where a person his animal soul is completely, not just nullified, but transformed. And again, the two levels. So now with that, let us read inside. Perek Yud. Perek Yud. V'hinei, and now, Kesha'oda magber nafshe lekis. When a person strengthens the power of what? Nafshe lekis, of his divine soul, as we learned. There's a battle going on. And the person strengthens himself, essentially supporting the influence of the divine soul. The nilcham kol kachim abamis, and wages war against the animal soul to the extent kol kach at shemegaresh u'mavayer harash ba mechol lasmoli, to the extent that he manages to expel and eliminate. Megaresh means to expel, like gators, to chase away, eliminate, and u'mavayer, eliminate. Harash ba mechol lasmoli, the evil from the left chamber of the heart. And he brings that eye when he says biur, like we talk biur chum, it's eliminating. Kumash kosev uve'arta hara mikirbacha. As the verse states in Dvarim, Yud Gimel Vav 13:6, and you shall eliminate the evil from your midst. So midst means the community. But here, the Alter Rebbe's diuk, look at the Gavaldike diuk here, mikirbacha. Read it literally, from within you. Because within the person is the left side of the heart, is where there resides the animal soul. But here we're talking about a person who has so strengthened his divine soul that he has waged war to the point that he's eliminated. So think of the city now. Let's go back to the example of the city. So there's a city, there's a war being waged in the city. And it's going back and forth. But then at some point, the king, in this case the divine soul, begins to take control. It could be slowly, it could be more intensely, until the point that he eliminates and it causes the enemy to leave, to flee, as it is in a war, to flee and eliminate it from where? From its place where it was residing within the irktana, in the small city of the person. And that is eliminating the evil from within the midst, the kirbecha, from within that city, from within you. And then he goes on, however, he's not completely transformed the enemy. See, even though there's a mastery, and you're mastering and governing the city, but the evil has not been completely transformed to good. So here the Alter Rebbe says, Nikret Tzaddik she'ena gomer. He is classified as an incomplete tzaddik, the tzaddik v'raloi. And another name for it, the tzaddik who has bad, like we learned earlier. And he's going to explain what means veraloi. Here also the diak, veraloi, that there's ra, but it's kaful for bottle, it's subjugated to the good within him. So we've established that he's won the battle, he's eliminated, and he's expelled and eliminated the evil, but he's not completely transformed it. So as we discussed, it's possible you can completely win over a city, but there still can be pockets of resistance. Not necessarily actual resistance, but they have not become your allies. They're no longer fighting you. You've won the battle, but they're not necessarily your allies. That's a tzaddik she'ena gomer, a tzaddik v'raloi. But let's talk about a moment this word, hine kisha odom. Until now, we were talking about two souls at war with each other. And depends who dominates, the divine soul, the animal soul. Indeed, in the previous chapter, when he talked about the battle, he said these words. Each one wants to control. Kach, the same thing. These two kings, the two souls, are warring with each other. Its desire and will is to take control. And the animal soul, the opposite. Here he suddenly introduces an interesting word, kisha ha'adam. Mag benafsh alikis. Who's the adam? Why? What would be wrong if he said v'hinei kisha mag benafsh alikis, or kisha nizgaber mashan? The divine soul dominates. So there's an interesting gloss and note from the Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek, Alter Rebbe's grandson, writes the following. On these words, Kisha'od Magbid, he writes, Ayin Lekaman Pedig Chavtes, delve later in Tanya, chapter 29, L'masha makshin ha'ela mihu ha'adam, addressing the issue, the question, what the world asks, the people ask, who's the person? The classic famous question. You have a divine soul stating one thing. The animal soul, who decides? They're the fighters. Who's deciding? So the Tzemach Tzedek is referring us to chapter 29. The question is, what does he mean by that? When you look in chapter 29, indeed, the Alter Rebbe explains that by the difference between a tzaddik and a beinoni, by the beinoni, where the animal soul is sustaining the body and it's still full intensity, it's only that he controls his thought, speech, and action. So he says, Nimtze hi ha'odam atzmei, that the nefesh ha'chayunis, that the nefesh ha'bamis, different words, the biological soul, is the person itself. Mashenkin tzaddikim, by them is the opposite, the soul, their pure soul, the divine soul, hu ha'odam. So in other words, Odom is determined by which is the dominant soul. By a beinoni, the dominant soul is the animal soul, even though there's control over the actual thought, speech, and action. And therefore the Odom is nefesh ha'chayunis. By a tzaddik, who's in control is the nefesh halakis, so nefesh halakis hu ha'odam. V'gufam nikra basar ha'odam. And their bodies are simply like the flesh, like a case, like a box where the soul resides. So based on that, it's possible to say that's what the Tzemach Tzedek means. That when it says here, ha'odam, that from what it based on chapter 29, that ha'odam here would be the nefesh halakis. But the language in Tanya, then it says, V'hine kisha odam, nefesh halakis, magben nefesh halakis, that the divine soul strengthens the divine soul. Here clearly it seems that Adam is not the divine soul. So what does he mean? And we're definitely not talking about the animal soul because we're talking about a tzaddik. So therefore one could say that the Tzemach Tzedek is suggesting that Adam means that the divine soul is intensifying and he doesn't mind the double language, so to speak. There are Chassidim, however, of Greinim, who in his interpretation of Tanya, that say that the Adam is referring to a third entity. There's the divine soul, there's the animal soul, there's a nefesh hasichlis, there's the intellectual soul, which is neutral. And that's like the arbiter, listening to both, and that's what makes the decision, nefesh hashlishis. And that's what means hine ha'odam, hine kisha'odam magbedem. The nefesh hasichlis determines and to side with and give strength to the divine soul. That's what the Alter Rebbe is referring to here. The thing is, the Alter Rebbe doesn't talk about the nefesh hasichlis in Tanya. He mentions it once, he hints to it. Talks about it in Maimorim, yes, that there are two souls in Tanya, and then there's a third soul. But yet there is a way to explain it as well. So an interesting discussion, relevant to the practical interpretation. At the end of the day, this person is being controlled by the divine soul. The question is what the word ha'odam means in this context. Okay. So that's part of how you try to understand that pshat. But now let's go back. So what do we have? So this person is now called a tzaddik she'ena gomer, tzaddik v'rale. Tahainu, and the Alter Rebbe explains what means tzaddik v'rale. Sheyesh ba'edayin ma'at mizer ra b'chol lasmoli. That is to say, there still remains some trace, some minuscule amount of evil in the left chamber of the heart. We're talking about a tzaddik. Remember, he's conquered the city. But to say that every corner, every fiber, every detail, every iota of the city has been transformed to be his ally, no. So there's something still remains, some trace, something. Only being such a small amount, it is suppressed and voided and subjugated by the good. So think of a city that was conquered. And some of the people in the city now are allies with the king, the divine soul. But there's some that are neutral. No, they're not, maybe they won't oppose him, but they're not for him. They're quiet. But they have within them still, they can have resentment, resistance, even if they don't act on it. You can't say you can trust them entirely, because they could rise, potentially. But they're outnumbered. They're outnumbered by the majority, and I don't just mean in quantity, in quality as well. And that's what he means, ra loy, that the ra, that is there, the small amount of the opposition is kafu for bottle, is subjugated, loy, to the goodness within him. So that minority, that's called the minority of the opposition, is outnumbered and nullified. Now you could ask, what difference does it make? If practically speaking, this force is neutral and is not acting against, it's not opposing the king, so what difference does it make? Bottom line is a tzaddik. And it's true. Not just in his thought, speech, and action, because even a Beinoni is like that. But also his faculties are what's dominating the divine soul. And yet, it's important to know, because in measuring people's progress, there can be a situation where you're higher than a Beinoni. He's a tzaddik. And for all practical purposes, completely dedicated to the divine. But there's still parts. There's still vestiges that remain that have not been transformed. And think about it in a cosmic or a larger level. As we prepare the world for Geula, for Mashiach, you could have the whole world is almost ready, but there's still people who are not. Again, they may not be opposing, but they're not completely ready to go. So that's what this indicates. Therefore, there is the potential, not necessarily of an uprising. That's also possible. But it's not total transformation and therefore total conquest. When we say, for example, Ruach HaTuma Avra Min HaOretz, when Mashiach comes, the spirit of toxicity will be completely eliminated. Okay, that will come from above. But the idea, completely eliminated, and everything will be transformed. There will be one smidgen. Nothing will remain that has not been transformed. By the tzaddik v'rale, the tzaddik she'eino gomer, it's not the case. And now he explains, in a way, how it also affects psychologically this tzaddik. U'lechein nidmaloi, and that's why he imagines this tzaddik she'eino gomer. Ki vayigarsheu vayelech loi. That he's driven it away and is gone from him. It's a language from Tehillim, Lamed Daled Aleph, 34:1. All of it completely. Because for all practical purposes, when you look at the city, who's controlling it? It's the divine soul's forces. That's why you can imagine and think that there is nothing left that is neutral. Aval be'emes, however, in truth, ilu cholaf v'holach loy legamri kol harasha boy. If indeed the evil had entirely left and departed, hoye nepach l'tev mamash. It wouldn't just be the absence of it; it would have been converted, transformed to positive good. So you could ask, what's the proof? How do you know? And the answer is, because remember, the animal soul is not fundamentally evil. The animal soul has a power of desire, and that power of desire can go toward positive things. So therefore, if you actually had completely eliminated, then the animal soul is not gone. Remember. Then its desires are directed toward godliness. That's called transformation. The fact that there is still a neutral element means that there's something still remaining. So we're not talking about annihilating. It doesn't ever say the word annihilating. Annihilating the evil, the garments, the godim matzayim that the animal soul dresses itself in dirty garments. But you want the animal soul in its purity to be directed toward godliness, with both hearts, with both sides of you, Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Hara. In addition, remember what we learned at the end of chapter 9, that the intention of the animal soul is l'tev sa'adam. That was the expression. For the good of the person. Why? Because his intention is to follow what God wants, and it's only to tempt, to bring out the stronger powers of the child of the king, of the neshama, of the nefesh elokis. So in that sense, the divine soul has a role. So it's not just about eliminating, it's either transforming or it's not yet transformed. And that's why he says that if indeed it had left and departed, it would have been converted. Because really, the evil would have departed, so then what's left? The reason that those people in the town are still not for the king, they're not against necessarily or opposing directly, actively, is because they've not been transformed yet. So if you really get rid of their negative feelings toward the king, then they end up being channels that are aligned with what the king wants, which in this case is the divine soul. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to continue Ubir Inyan. To understand well what the Tzaddik Sheni Gomer is, we're now going to introduce the Tzaddik Gomer. So it's interesting, he didn't just say, okay, Tzaddik Sheni Gomer, now we're going to talk about the Tzaddik Gomer. Ubir Inyan. He's going to explain what the Tzaddik Gomer is, that he does transform. So just to give a little taste and appetizer of what we're going to learn next week, he begins to talk about in Tzaddik Gomer Shenepach Harash L'Tev. Because whenever you want to understand something, you always want to see the contrast. If you're talking about something that's not totally transformed, what does it look like when it is transformed? So we're now going to learn about the highest level of a tzaddik possible. Tzaddik Gomer. Tzaddik V'Tevle. Where there's not even a smidgen, there's not even an iota of not just opposition, or even neutral. Everything has been transformed. But for that, we'll wait till next week. As we continue this journey, go to tanyaapplied.com, where you can find this and many programs, all the previous programs, as well as other Hasidic resources, all part of a website called chassidusapplied.com. Other classes and other resources all around teaching Chassidus and applying it to our lives. Everyone have a good Tavoch and a Freilich and Chanukah. Chanukah is about transforming darkness into night, transforming the animal soul into the divine soul with the pure oil. Good Tavoch and a Freilich and Chanukah.
This has been My Life Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit chassidusapplied.com for archived classes and more resources.